during this course. We've gone over what the difference is between quantitative, qualitative, and how they overlap. We've talked about what action research actually is, the process of it, going and planning for it, the different stages of the action research process. Now we're going to get into actually developing an action research plan. Okay? Now, the thing that you need to know, and I'll say this in an ongoing fashion, that what you are going and investigating will determine the kind of research plan that you have. So don't be surprised if yours is a little different from your classmates. That's not necessarily something to worry about. Again, talk it out. Chat with people, email, get a hold of me. But let's go ahead and go through developing an action research plan. Okay? So the first thing you have to decide is how you are going to approach data collection, what kind of data you're going to use. In this, you have the choice between using quantitative and qualitative data, or you can go and mix the two together. It depends on what your question is going to be asking, what you're trying to go and get at. Now, with the use of an interview and an observation as one of the constituent components of your action research project, it doesn't mean that you strictly have to do a qualitative approach. That tends to be the flavor that most of these projects take. You're not strictly confined to that. I just want you to have the experience of the interview and the observation. Okay. Now, if you're wondering, well, what should I be doing? Take a look at Table 4.1. It's listed right here. This is just something to maybe help you think through the process, what it is you're wanting to look at, and maybe you'll come up with some conclusions there. Okay. The research question. Fundamental question inherent in the research topic under investigation. This is the guiding light for what you are trying to do, the original intent of this entire endeavor right here. Now, if you go and you look in your text, there are examples of research questions that have been asked. Coming up with a research question and framing it is not as easy as one might think. It does take a little bit of time. And so, don't be surprised if it takes you 2 or 3 drafts of a question before you really have it nailed down. What you're going to want to be asking is something specific so that you can structure an investigation around that particular question. Okay, so here's some characteristics of a research question. Okay, qualitative questions should be more open-ended than quantitative questions. Now, the reason for this is if you are wanting to see people's perception of what happens, through maybe a particular change in practice, you may not be wanting to nail that down strictly to some kind of a statistics or a percentage, but that'll go and frame the way this particular question comes about. They should not be stated in a manner that assumes an answer before data is even collected. Now, this is where teachers' intuition can sometimes become just a little bit of a liability. We all have very strong intuition, but don't assume because you have done this before that you know how this is going to turn out. You may have an idea for where it's going to be going, but that doesn't mean that it's going to turn out that way because you haven't gone and collected the data yet, so there's no way to know that. Ensure that the question is neither too broad nor too specific. Again, the Goldilocks scenario. It has to be just right. Okay? They should be based on the body of literature on the topic. Now, it is not to say that when you go out and do the literature reconnaissance that you may not find a question that is just kind of embedded in there, that it just stands out at you. But you may find something that comes strictly from the context of your classroom or the context of your school. Equally valid. Equally valid. Okay? This must be answerable based on the data that you have collected. That's the thing. You can't go and, when you have a research project, you can't go and ask a question and then collect data and present that data in a way that, well, the data does not inform the question that you asked in the first place. It's an apples and oranges kind of a thing. There has to be strong connective tissue there. Okay? Must follow ethical practices. We'll talk about this more as time goes by, but There's an etiquette that is involved in conducting research, and we're expected to do that as professionals and as teachers. But we'll get to that more later. Should be both important and feasible to answer. This is where you come into my perception of this, meaning I want this to be worth it to you. Ask a question, conduct a project that is worth your time. Okay? So the hypothesis. Okay, a tentative but intelligent and informed guess as to the outcome of the study that is made before the study begins. Now, if you, I've seen lots of action research projects where the hypothesis was not stated outright. I believe this will happen. If you conduct this, then this will be the result. Doesn't always happen that way. Okay, but a hypothesis is just something that is part of the scientific process and is part of educational research. Again, it depends on what your particular project is calling for. Okay, there are three types of hypotheses: the null hypothesis, the non-directional, and the directional. Your book has some very good information on this, so be sure to refer to this. And if you're going and conducting a study that is more quantitative in nature, these will come into the picture. Qualitative, probably not quite so much. Okay? So the characteristics of a hypothesis, all right? The first one and the second one are really important here because a hypothesis can only be supported by the data and the analysis. That's all. It's not, that's pretty much just where it stops. It is simply supported, a hypothesis that you make, the data that you collect, the way that you conduct the analysis, it simply supports it or it does not support it. That's why a hypothesis is either proven or disproven. Okay? So qualitative research designs. Okay? A misnomer in qualitative research, perhaps it should be called a research plan. I will agree with Mertler on this. I think that's a good way to go and phrase this, because when you're talking about a plan, you're talking about something that can also evolve as time goes by, and so that's just something that's important to keep in the back of your head. The questions may tend to be more open-ended. They might even emerge during the study. That is where you come up with this concept of emergent design. Sometimes as you are going through, you find that you may not be asking the right questions. So you can adapt what you are doing in order to go and come up with, or not to come up with, but to better develop maybe questions being asked, maybe even the specific question that is driving your research study. Okay? Several approaches exist in qualitative research. Now, here you have listed case studies, ethnographies, phenomenological studies. We're going to be doing a case study in this class. Now, like I've said on the first slide, the first lecture, there are lots of different presentations that a qualitative research can take. You have hermeneutical research, normative research, philosophical research, phenomenological, ethnographic, etc. What we're doing here is basically just starting it out. Now, if going and conducting an ethnography is something that interests you, I wholeheartedly encourage it. The same with the phenomenological study. But you have to start somewhere, so we're starting with the approach of a case study. Okay, so specific to case studies, all right, you're detailing a single setting, a particular context. Now, if this is your class, great. If you happen to be conducting your action research in the class of one of your colleagues, that's fine as well. If you're going and looking at something that is more in the school environment, that's just fine as well, because you're talking about an isolated setting. Now, that means there can be lots of people coming in and out of it. There can be lots of different players involved, but there are specific norms that are associated with this setting. That is the one that you're taking a look at. Okay? Most common type, they involve the study of particular organization or aspect of an organization, i.e. school environment, classroom setting, etc. Okay. All right, so going and looking at observational studies. Now, the reason that I keep coming to observation is, again, because that's one of the requirements of your research project in this class. We're going to talk about this a lot. Mertler discusses it at length. You have some articles that you're going to be reading that go and discuss this, but it's something that is very natural in its the way it happens, the way it occurs within a research study. Okay, the focus is more broad, meaning when you're going and observing, you are not necessarily just wanting to go and see what one person is doing. There's a term, and it's not very well known. It's called grokking. Grokking. And what grokking refers to is you're literally drinking in everything that is going on. That's the power of observation right here. Not just what is going on, but also what you're thinking about, what you're observing. Okay? More to come on that. All right, so another sort is the constant comparative method. Okay, when you're going and looking at this can be a mixed methods approach. It can be quantitative and it can also be qualitative, but you're talking about multiple data sources. So you're wanting to compare things that are going on. You may have a setting where you're trying a certain kind of teaching approach within one class, but not within another. And so you're comparing the way the two occur. It's like a control and an experimental group. Okay. Quantitative research designs. Okay, they require the use of quantitative methods and data. Now you have 4 different designs down here that are listed: descriptive designs, correlational, group comparison, and single subject designs. I tend not to go over quantitative approaches to research very much in this course because of the way that we are framing action research. I don't want to give you the impression that you are precluded from doing this, but when we go and look at conducting an action research plan, we tend to view it more broadly than it being strictly in one camp. Because I've had students in the past that have gone and, they have conducted their interviews, they have conducted their observations, but they have also gone and collected scores, test scores, survey results, things like that would be considered more quantitative in nature. Okay? We'll talk more about this later. Okay, so a descriptive design in quantitative research, you're describing and making an interpretation of the current status of individuals, objects, conditions, or events. Okay, so literally you're wanting to expose the inner guts of the people that are a part of this research setting through the research design that you have. Correlational design, you're talking about the way that 2 different approaches, what is it that correlates with an advantage or a disadvantage or a particular result in one as opposed to the other? Because you're talking about the relationship of variables here, independent and dependent variables. This is one of the approaches where you come into the use of statistical terminology, and that is just fine. I would encourage you to do that if you are interested in doing it, but I'm going to come back to the fact that we tend to frame things just a little bit broader in this course. So group comparison designs. You're attempting to investigate cause and effect relationships by comparing 2 or more groups that differ on some characteristic, i.e. you have control group and experimental group. Maybe it's a particular teaching strategy, classroom management strategy, a particular way that you're conducting assessment, etc. But you're wanting to see how the 2 groups fare. All right, ethical considerations. I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about this because there's always more to talk about it with. Whenever you conduct any kind of an investigation, The ethical part of this means that you are seeking to do, well, obviously, no harm to any of the study participants, and you're only using the data that you gather to better understand the situation. Now, whenever you go and do something like this, if you are researching in terms of, being a university faculty member, there's something called the Institutional Review Board that where you write a proposal to them. You describe exactly what you're going to be doing so that they can be sure that it is perfectly legal. You'll remember this from doing the city assignment, the CITI, Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative. Back before that, it goes all the way back to World War II. You can go and look at scientists from Germany during the Nazi era. You can go and look at the era of Tuskegee here in the United States, where ethics took a back seat to people wanting to understand what happened to the human body in certain conditions. The rules and laws that apply from those times inform the way that we do research now. Now, here's the very important takeaway. Because this is a class project, you're not required to go and author an IRB proposal and have it evaluated and have it approved. That's because this is a class project. Now, here's the double takeaway. The results from this project you can certainly go and use in your classroom, but legally you are not allowed to disseminate them in any public forum. Okay? That's the law right there. Now, one thing I will say, if let's say some of you go on to a higher education at some point or want to conduct an outside research project, you have to have what is called consent and assent, if you look here on the screen. And that's the equivalent of a permission slip, where either minors or their parents will sign off and say that they consent to go and do this. For purposes of your research project in the here and now, what I would do is I would author a letter that explains exactly what is going on and send it home to your parents with a contact information at the bottom. That would be a very good idea. You always want to keep them in a loop, and you can just tell them that this is part of the requirements for a graduate class. We'll talk more about this again, but this is just a brief rundown when we're talking about the ethical considerations of research. So this is the end for Chapter 4, and we will talk to you later.